threat from Belarus. Does it really exist, especially for the Ukrainian capital? Is the northern Ukrainian border sufficiently protected? The battle for Kostiantynivka is currently raging around the clock and with very high intensity. What is needed first and foremost to stop the occupiers there and the unique front line with no visible obstacles? Is there a threat of an enemy landing from the Kinburn Spit, and is it currently safe in the Ukrainian Black Sea region? Hello everyone. This is the latest operational review project from the Specker editorial team to help you understand the geography of the front. As usual, we will be using the Deep State Map online map, which the developers have allowed us to use in this program. Today's special correspondent is journalist and military observer Denis Popovic. Mr. Denis, welcome. Thank you for having me. Mobilization, the development of infrastructure along the border, nuclear saber rattling, all of this on one hand and on the other, deliberately pseudo-peacekeeping statements. The self-proclaimed leader of Belarus, who for a week now has either been trying to raise his own value or has actually agreed to provide Moscow and its top war criminal with Belarusian territory as a springboard for a new, renewed invasion of Ukraine. Talks about this have been ongoing for more than a month now, in fact, with risk assessments ranging from minimal to critical. Moreover, such warnings come not only from anonymous Telegram channels, but also from official sources, including references to the intelligence of Western partners. Moreover, just last week, the current Ukrainian commander-in-chief Zelensky also spoke about the existence of such quite real so-called threats. Is Lukashenko really ready for such an openly suicidal scenario, or does he simply lack the arguments and will to resist Putin's pressure? In fact, this question is secondary. Instead, the more important question is whether the Belarusian military are actually ready to carry out such a senseless order and officially, under their own flag, become involved in the war on the side of the terrorist state. That is much more important. And another important question, if such a scenario is indeed being considered, when has the Kremlin planned the invasion? Again, if all of this is not just empty talk and elements of cognitive influence, Denis, in your opinion, is it really possible that Lukashenko will once again allow his territory to be used for a renewed invasion of Ukraine? Or could it be that this time it will be exclusively the troops of the Potato Führer?
What happened once can happen again. That is, he could allow such use of his territory by the Russian Federation. As for whether the Belarusians could attack Ukraine, to be honest, I have my doubts, because they would need a full mobilization for that. Their army is not ready for war, not for modern warfare. If they launch an offensive, it will end very badly for them.
According to the estimates of the coordinator of the information resistance, Kostiantin Moshevets, he said it's roughly at the level of one army corps. That's the total strength of their component there. Basically, that's a force we are capable of grinding down.
The entire armed forces of Belarus amount to 65,000 personnel. All of them. That includes the ground forces and the air force. They don't have a navy. A powerful, highly mobile special forces contingent of soldiers. But we need to understand what kind of tasks they can actually set for themselves. If we're talking about taking Kiev with reinforced Belarusian armies, or cutting off the Warsaw highway that runs through Zhytomyr region, Rivne region, towards Kovel and further towards Poland, then significant forces are needed there. Policia is a region where it's very difficult to advance. There are few roads running from north to south. An advance is possible along these roads. I counted about 7 possible routes there.
Well, give or take, yes. That's if we don't count the exceptionally swampy and forested areas.
It's hardly possible to advance there. They have an old-style mechanized army without combat experience.
But they have a lot of tanks.
What are armored tanks actually in
contemporary
warfare? Neither Belarus is preparing for this, nor is the Russian Federation transferring troops. That's what we need to proceed from. If you don't transfer these troops, we will see it. It won't be possible to do this unnoticed.
Let's move on to the current line of combat engagement. Today, we'll start with the sector around Kostiantynivka. In Donetsk region, at the end of May, the intensity of fighting in that sector increased to about 130 combat engagements. It seems that there are absolutely no signs that the intensity of the fighting is decreasing as of today. Overall, it is the Muscovites who are attacking, who previously surrounded Kostiantynivka, so to speak, in a semicircle. Moreover, 2/3 of enemy attacks are flanking pressure from the southwest and northeast, and the remaining 1/3 is direct pressure from the south along the T0516 highway. This is a local road that actually leads from Toretsk itself to Kostiantynivka, and it turns into the H20 highway, and along the road that runs from Oleksandr Shultine through the southern districts of private housing, passes to the ruins of the railway station, and then stretches from there to Drushkivka. The line of combat contact in this sector, if we consider only the nearest section, so to speak, from Linivka to the current position at Molocharka, is about 30 kilometers. But I think it's also worth taking into account the stretch from Stepanivka, where the Russians are trying to create a kind of narrow wedge in the direction of Dovabalka, apparently with the aim of forming a broader enveloping phase on the western flank. And all the way to the section of Verolubivka-Maiske near the western ruins of Chasiv Yar, where apparently the Ukrainian defensive line has not yet been withdrawn. Altogether, all of this combined turns the line of contact into a stretch of more than 60 kilometers. However, at the same time, there is currently no clear line of contact in this sector, or at least it is not even referred to as such, because a huge factor here remains the so-called gray zone, a completely uncontrolled territory by either side, which on average is between 3 and 6 kilometers wide as of today. Overall, the Russians are attacking with small infantry groups on more than a dozen local directions and axes around Kostiantynivka and within the city itself. However, I would say that about half a dozen sectors with a particular focus are clearly emerging. Firstly, from Stepanivka, it is likely that the Rashid 255th, the Rashid Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 20th Motorized Rifle Division, is trying to attack in the direction of Dovabalka. I think their goal is not so much Kostiantynivka itself, but rather to create logistical problems for the Ukrainian garrison defending Kostiantynivka. Moreover, they aim to create these problems much further north of Kostiantynivka, that is, deeper in the Ukrainian rear, along the stretch from Ilinivka to Bereztok. The Muscovites are also attacking. Here they have their 77th Motorized Rifle Regiment and the 10th Tank Regiment. Overall, these are all attacks in the sector, starting from Stepan Bandera Street. Unfortunately, advance assault groups of the Muscovites have already been spotted there as well, along the H32 highway towards Bereztok. But overall, all of this is pressure in the direction of the northwestern and southwestern outskirts of the city. On the adjacent flank, attacking from Pritecheno and Stupochki, it appears that the Muscovites have managed to advance even further south of the H32 highway, all the way to Molocharka. It seems that the Muscovites have managed to gain a foothold, at least at the intersection of Oleksatykhy Street and the overpass that runs above the railway branch, and to slip into the ruins of private urban buildings, at least up to the level of Novodmitrivka. And it seems that at least there were attempts by the Muscovites to gain a foothold at that very Molocharka as well. And of course, from the south, the enemy's pressure is mainly exerted by the forces of the 4th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 3rd Combined Arms Army, with the apparent presence here of the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 150th Division and the 78th Motorized Regiment Akhmat Center, the so-called Kadarovite Special Forces. And notably, it was on this section that the so-called FSB Donetsk detachment was spotted. It's hard to say anything about its combat capabilities, but at the very least it is present there for some reason. As for the fact that fighting is already taking place directly in Kostiantynivka, unfortunately, this is not news. It's been going on for over a month. The latest updates we have, unfortunately not very good ones, are that the forward assault groups of the Muscovites were spotted near the ruins of the Oko gas station at the intersection of the N32 highway and Svobody Avenue, which runs through Kostiantynivka. The Muscovites were also spotted at the junction where Stepan Bandera Avenue connects to that same Svobody Avenue near Yuvileyny Park, as well as in the sector on the eastern flank in the area of private housing, which is bordered by Manufakturna Street, Chasovoyarska Street and Tbiliska Street. Again, is the enemy currently present there? There is no reliable information about the enemy's established positions, but the fact that the Russians are deploying enormous forces to storm Kostiantynivka is undeniable. However, on the other hand, their main objective, to break out into the operational space apparently already north of Kostiantynivka, primarily along the H20 highway, has definitely not been achieved as of today. We have the opportunity to ask for more details about the circumstances currently surrounding the defense of Kostiantynivka from an officer, one of the officers of the 36th Separate Marine Brigade, named after Rear Admiral Mikhailo Bilinsky. Smyan is joining us live from the Specor studio. Smyan, I greet you.
Wishing you strength.
Before I ask any questions, I first ask viewers to look at the QR code on their screens. It should have already appeared. The anti-tank company of the 36th Brigade of our Marines is in great need of FPV drones. They are frankly in short supply. These are currently the primary tools that help our defenders stop and destroy the occupiers, especially in and around Kostiantynivka. So please, if you can, don't stay on the sidelines when it comes to this help. Smian, first of all, tell us, what is the situation in Kostiantynivka right now? Are there even the slightest signs of life? Do you think civilians might still be staying in the city among the ruins? Is there at least a theoretical possibility to evacuate people from there?
The city is largely destroyed, but according to various estimates, there may still be between 1,500 to 2,000 local residents there. And strangely enough, and sadly enough, it's not only elderly people who once decided not to evacuate because of their age, and as my parents sometimes say, I was born here, and here is where I will die. But there are also a certain number of men of conscription age who did not evacuate precisely because of fears of mobilization, and now they are literally hiding from the war in the very heart of the fighting. As for evacuation, even theoretically, it is a very difficult task because there is practically no vehicle traffic from Kostiantynivka towards Oleksivka-Vodrushkivka. It's a suicide mission. And getting out on foot, even for a trained Marine, is an extremely difficult task because on this route, deadly danger awaits at every step. Despite this, from time to time, people still manage to get out, choosing favorable weather conditions that hinder enemy operators and FPV drones from working. We
spoke with your comrades, more or less at the beginning of May. At that time, according to estimates by the Ukrainian General Staff, around 130 battles per week were taking place near Kostiantynivka and in the city itself. Over these 3 weeks, a little more that have passed, has the intensity of the war in the sector and the enemy's tactics changed in any way? And what does the daily picture of the confrontation look like now? Let's put it that way.
If we compare it to the beginning of the month, the intensity of the fighting has not changed significantly. It's still 20 to 30 combat engagements per day. This also depends on the situation and on weather conditions. The enemy is now making much greater efforts to disrupt our logistics. They are trying to bombard nearby settlements with glide bombs, hoping to hit vehicles and personnel. They are also using various types of drones to hunt our vehicles and armored equipment, not only directly in the area of Kostiantynivka, but also much farther away, trying to disrupt connections with other regions. The objective of our enemies here is absolutely clear: to complicate and ideally to make impossible the rotation and supply of material and technical resources directly to the frontline positions in order to exhaust our defenders on the front line as much as possible. The enemy also does not abandon their tactic of infiltrating urban areas in small groups, and we are actively trying to counter this.
Smiano, is it correct to say that as of today, the battle for Kostiantynivka has entered a phase of direct confrontation within the city itself? Are there any established enemy positions within the geographical boundaries of the city?
The situation at the moment, as you mentioned before my appearance, is quite tense and intense. However, it is still too early to say that the fighting has entered the phase of direct urban combat. The enemy is infiltrating in small groups. These can be groups of even just 1 or 2 soldiers. They try to find shelter among the buildings, secure a foothold, wait for reinforcements, and then advance further with larger forces. However, at the moment, we are not observing any established fortified positions in the urban area.
Smani, thank you very much for finding the time and opportunity to answer our questions so thoroughly and in such detail. Please take care of yourself and your soldiers. Thank you. Dennis, is the main focus, the main direction of enemy attacks in the sector around Kostiantynivka now these pliers or the southern flank? All the more so because literally over the last 2 days, the situation at the edges of these pliers has changed rapidly, or at least that's how it seems to me.
The pliers. You can see from the map that it's the pliers in order to encircle the city and create conditions for a semi-encirclement here. In principle, we can even see their attempts to advance in order to create conditions for a semi-encirclement. All of them are even converging toward the ring of this highway. But to talk about any established positions here is absurd. I agree, it's not possible. What are established positions? 2 Russians are holed up in a basement. And what do they control?
Is that a position or not? It's
presence. And to talk about any established positions in the city, I agree, it's too early right now. In
your opinion, is a prolonged, effective, and successful defense of Kostiantynivka possible?
We are forgetting about the situation near the Pokrovsk territory of Vinohradne, a bit further to the west. Last week, Deep State showed that we left that city. There was no official announcement, so now we will be balancing between official and unofficial information. But if the Russians achieve success there, they will start putting pressure on Kostiantynivka with their troops. Either they would try to encircle the city with a small radius or with a larger radius so they could even enter it.
Higher up?
To create an encirclement, to try to create an encirclement. I want to emphasize this point. Therefore, focusing only on Kostiantynivka and the situation around the city would not be entirely correct, because there is...
The southern operational zone is yet another critical sector of the front that I want us to take a closer look at today. Not the whole thing, of course. Focus primarily on the area where these three different regions meet, the Donetsk region. In the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, roughly speaking, these are the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipol directions. In the Oleksandrivka direction, basically since around February 10th, there has been and still is, despite the recent lack of detailed information from this specific area, ongoing and persistent pressure from the Ukrainian Strike Tactical Group generally moving toward the southeast, situated south of the National Highway. This involves the H-15 route connecting Donetsk, Kharkov, and Zaporizhia. All of this significant military activity is happening generally to the southeast of the settlement of Pokrovsk. This area remains a critical point of interest for observers monitoring the current frontline developments. But on the other hand, the enemy's Vostok military group, whose primary combat forces are operating right here, has carried out a significant and extensive series of regroupings and reinforced the front line with additional reserves since the beginning of May. The apparent goal is, if not to retake at least some of the territory they previously lost, then at the very least to effectively slow down and obstruct the advance of Ukrainian forces in this specific direction. On the other hand, we're actually talking about a significant stretch of land that is approximately 50 linear kilometers long. If we're talking from the village of Podubna with Mirin, which is located within the Donetsk region, all the way to the town of Dobropilia, which sits directly on the R85 highway, already situated in the Zaporizhia region. On the other hand, 15 square kilometers of territory, specifically in the direction of Stepove and Kalinivsky, were recaptured by Ukrainian forces even before the start of this week. And obviously, the movement of Ukrainian forces is generally aimed, I assume, at Novomykolaivka and Timirivka, and overall in the direction of the main highway that runs from Velika Novosilka to Huliaipole. It's ongoing. The highway is under constant pressure from Ukrainian artillery and drones, which seriously complicates and shortens the lives, first and foremost, of the Russian soldiers from the 29th Unit and the 36th Combined Arms Army, whose specialized units are primarily operating within this specific sector. On the other hand, the main offensive efforts of the Russian military forces have clearly shifted to the sector located further south, that is, toward the Huliaipol direction. This is the critical section of the front line stretching from Ternavate to Charivne, which is now, for the most part, already situated directly on the eastern bank of the Haichul River. Every day, the Russians carry out between 30 and 50 offensive actions here. Again, these are mostly small infantry groups, at least according to official sources. In particular, from the areas of Kosivske and Pridorozhne, the Russians are trying to advance toward Rizvyanka. This is south of Ternavate. But Ukrainian forces just a bit further south and literally the day before also carried out a series of effective counterattacks and managed to push the Russians back by about 2 square kilometers near Dobropilia. From Praluki, the Russians are attacking Vozdvizhivka and the gap between it and Elena Kostiantinovka. But at the same time, literally in the opposite direction to the northeast, Ukrainian forces also carried out a series of counterattacks here. The entire stretch from Kvitkov all the way to Zalesnikna, this whole section is where the main forces of the Russian 5th Combined Arms Army are attacking, the most powerful in the Vostok group of forces. Mainly, it's the 127th Motor Rifle Division and the 57th Motor Rifle Brigade. It's worth mentioning that it was on this section that the Russians likely managed to break into Ipherka. There was information that, at the very least, they managed to get a foothold on the upper terrace. But here, too, the Ukrainians carried out a series of attacks from Starukrenka and Hirka toward that same railway area. Most likely, it's here, in this sector, on this stretch, that the Russians will move and deploy their newly formed 55th Marine Division into battle. It was created based on the 155th Separate Marine Brigade. Why? That's the assumption I'm making. In fact, because of these Ukrainian attacks and counterattacks, especially in the area of Zalesnishna and Charivna with Huliaipolske, according to assessments by the Institute for the Study of War and the Ukrainian General Staff, the Huliaipolske direction is currently one of the hottest spots along the entire front. Notably, it's almost the only place in the entire large Zaporizhia sector where the Russians are at least trying to exert some powerful, methodical pressure with their largest forces. Right now, we have the opportunity to learn a few details about the operational situation in the southern sector, particularly on the stretch of the front around Huliaipo. The Chief Sergeant of the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 5th Separate Assault Brigade, Yuri Siratuk, is joining the Spetskori studio. Mr. Yuri, welcome.
Glory to the heroes.
Glory! Please tell us, what is happening right now on the section of the defensive line held by the 5th Assault Brigade? After all, open sources available for analysis show that to the west of Huliapo, the enemy is currently trying to exert, as we've concluded for ourselves here, the greatest pressure along the entire front.
Well, I can speak as the Chief Sergeant, as someone who sees the battlefield from the soldier's perspective, from the viewpoint of our drone cameras. At the moment, the enemy hasn't achieved any significant successes. In other words, the enemy has slowed down. These days, it's even hard for us to hunt down and kill a lone stray Russian, because lately there have been very few of them. So it feels like this group has become exhausted, and that's exactly why they're bringing in reserves, because whether unfortunately or fortunately, they can no longer advance in large formations. When you mention that the enemy has been spotted in Kharkov and Tursa, well, they've been seen there before as well. So this is an infiltration tactic. Now we see that the groups are moving one by one. We're observing an interesting phenomenon. They're moving without much enthusiasm. Quite often, we see that they're accompanied by kamikaze drones. I think this kamikaze drone acts as a blocking detachment. So that guy Vanya simply has no chance not to move forward. He might make it through somewhere, maybe get in touch over the radio. We intercept their radio communications, but that doesn't mean he can establish a foothold there. Our strike and search teams are constantly operating, both in the Zalizhna area, in the Horka area, and in the Tursa area. These enemies are detected and methodically eliminated every day. So their infiltration tactics work in this area, but they have no way to build up forces or establish a foothold. And yes, it always seems to us that the direction we're in is the hardest. We always feel some kind of enemy pressure on us, but in recent days it feels like it's eased up. Although enemy drones are still very active here, the sheer number of them, remote mining, kamikaze drones, Zdun drones, and enemy Kriva are all working intensely.
I'm wondering, is there currently such a thing in this sector as a distinct and clearly defined line of contact? Or is it more of a blurred gray zone that is, I don't know, stretching across several kilometers in width? And accordingly, what would you say is the typical drone strike range on either side of this entire area?
We understand that there is no longer a line of contact. Instead, there's a strip about 2 to 5 kilometers wide depending on the weather. Let me emphasize that again. Sometimes under rain or fog, a lone enemy soldier might wander far in. Then we spot him and take him out. What we're talking about here is our defensive line. And it's not just defense, because we're constantly carrying out strike and search operations and also trying to push the enemy back. And the enemy is trying to infiltrate through our combat formations, which are currently spread thin, just like along the entire front line. As for enemy drone activity, within 5 to 10 kilometers, there is total control of the battlefield, because now, unfortunately, you can't drive vehicles or even armored vehicles into that zone. At that distance, all logistics are handled by ground robotic systems, and up to about 20 kilometers out, the enemy maintains control, especially over key logistical routes. We control the same depth on our side as well. But it's not total control. You can still move around there, but within 5 to 10 kilometers, the enemy has complete control over that part of the battlefield. Someone might slip through when the weather's bad, like during fog. These groups can get in, but lately, it's even hard for us to spot lone infiltrators. It really seems like they're having manpower problems here right now.
Thank you very much for your detailed account. Thank you so much for your work, both you and your soldiers. Please take care of yourself and your fighters. Do you see any signs that before autumn, in this eastern part of the Zaporizhia region, the Russians will try to turn their tactical gains into something more significant at the operational or even strategic level?
Definitely not at the strategic level. The strategic level means changing the course of the war.
Let's put it this way. In this case, it's about the artillery firing range to Zaporizhia.
That's not a strategic level. They wanted to reach those ranges near Stepnohursk. They almost managed to do it. Now from there, we're carrying out counterattacks. That's why we managed to push the threat away from Zaporizhia in terms of direct artillery shelling. I want to go back again to the data from May regarding the Russian capture of Ukrainian territories.
Actual results. Even though that is the case,
They do have objectives. They keep their theorists around. The goal to create a unified offensive front towards Zaporizhia still remains. The directions you mentioned show that they're trying to advance in that direction. But what we just heard from Mr. Yuri, and what we see overall looking at this map and these events, is that the offensive there has been stopped. It just can't be like that. They're attacking here. We counterattack. They're attacking here.
counterattack?
The fighting is ongoing on both sides. How is that even an offense? If they've moved their reserves there, we'll see how those reserves perform. Maybe they'll be able to do something there. Maybe resume offensive actions. But the tactic they're using now is infiltration. It doesn't involve a breakthrough.
I mean, could there be an entirely new and completely unexpected strategic direction opened up, thanks to, obviously, the redeployment of very substantial military reserves?
And where would those reserves come from?
Starting with the Pokrov-Smirnograd section of Znam.
They'd have to pull them out. We started our conversation with Belarus. If we're talking about security from Belarus, reserves are needed there. So that already implies mobilization. Right now, a lot of people are talking about mobilization. Again, according to RBC, they're trying to gather up to 100,000 personnel through mobilization. Mobilization orders are going out across the Russian Federation, but for now, it's just talk. So where do you get the reserves? They must come from somewhere. If we're saying that the Pokrovsk directions and the Donetsk sector are also the main ones, then there aren't enough people there. If we say that for them the main directions could be Zaporizhia, the Huliai-Pola direction, or Kiev and so on, then they need to look for reserves here. Right now,
It's definitely not possible to attack everywhere at once.
About half a year ago, at the start of winter, we talked about how they would pick two main directions for themselves, and basically that trend's continued until spring. But now there are doubts that they'll be able to advance equally successfully in two directions. Obviously, they'll have to choose just one option. And the trends in their offensive actions? Again, I'm looking at these stats on their progress versus their actual losses. In other words, it's quality versus quantity. But for them, it's a negative ratio. And
Now let's look at the front southernmost section, where beyond the supply line is just water, the Dnipro Bug estuary. Since 2022, the Russians have been shelling Ochaki and nearby settlements along the Mykolaiv coast from the Kinburn Spit, first with artillery and lately with drones as well. Obviously, the Russian command had plans to eventually carry out an amphibious operation there, seize the coastline, and then possibly strike either at the rear of Mykolaiv or perhaps advance toward Odessa. However, at least for now, all those enemy plans have been thwarted by Ukrainian soldiers, thanks in no small part to the round-the-clock work of our deep reconnaissance units. We had the chance to see their work near the coastline with our own eyes. A QR code is now on screen. These multi-purpose strike and recon drones are for the 122nd Territorial Defense Brigade's Unmanned Systems Battalion. Please help support the defenders of Ukraine's Black Sea region. Here it is, the Kinburn Spit in Ukraine's Black Sea region. That's exactly where, near Ochakiv, the battle is now raging. At the moment, this area is occupied by the enemy, but Ukrainian soldiers are doing everything they can to keep as few enemy forces on the Spit as possible. As soon as targets are detected in the direction of the Spit, Ukrainian artillery opens fire there.
Fire!
Yes, that's right. Absolutely excellent. Plus 20. Yes, that's exactly right.
Ukrainian unmanned bombers are flying there, towards the occupiers' advanced hideouts.
Airplane in the sky. Very good evening to you.
And around the clock, Hera admits the crew commander and pilot of a Ukrainian long-range drone, Ukrainian reconnaissance aircraft, circle over the temporarily occupied Kinburn Peninsula.
Right now, we're flying directly over the enemy, 10 kilometers beyond the lines where they're positioned. Our main function is to be constantly in the air, providing situational awareness. We're looking for various telltale signs in Kretch, which our teams then use to target with heavy bombers or the crews of the Big Fire.
From the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, and almost up until the start of this year, the Russians would drive their cannons, self-propelled guns, and rocket artillery vehicles almost right up to the shore of the Kinburn Spit. And without much effort to hide, they would shell the coastal part of mainland Mykolaiv region many times a day. Since then, says the commander of the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 122nd Territorial Defense Brigade, the situation has changed dramatically.
The last cannons, as far as I remember, were here 2.5 months ago. It was well camouflaged by the enemy, and it was also successfully destroyed by our drones. By the way, it was destroyed by FPV drones because they flew right onto the Spit.
Now, over the Kinburn Spit and much deeper, over enemy rear positions, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones are circling non-stop. They detect even the slightest movement of Russian infantry, the movement of equipment or long-range strike systems.
There are operational targets almost every day. Our task is to provide a constant visual feed so we can see what's happening on the Kinburn Spit, to track all movements and accordingly prevent them from moving. This morning the guys were working. It was our first flight and we managed to catch a bit of everything. We were adjusting artillery and they were working on moving targets.
Absolutely everything that you see right here.
It's changing rapidly. We're increasing our capabilities by expanding our crew of pilots and by adding various types of UAVs. There are no customs guns left there. We've pretty much destroyed everything. There's hardly any space left for the enemy there, so they just sit tight and barely come out for fresh air.
The commander of the Odessa Operational Tactical Group, Colonel Nosikov, together with the commander of the BPS, arrived at the Aero Reconnaissance Crew's position just as Hera's crew launched their Mercury toward the Kinburn Spit. For the fourth time, just today.
When we spot someone during the day, strike drones are very rapidly dispatched and effectively send the enemy in the right direction.
Lastly, thanks to their Mercury Ukrainian headquarters, understand that there are currently about 2,500 occupiers on the Kinburn Peninsula.
Obviously, there are a lot of enemy forces. As of today, there are almost 2,500 people on Kinburn and part of Technotorska. In the optical range, we can only detect about 15 to 17%. The enemy is camouflaging themselves very seriously.
Ukrainian forces have pushed most of the enemy troops deeper into the peninsula. But there are still about 900 Russians left in the western part. And the enemy headquarters definitely understands why they are risking their personnel and equipment by not leaving the Kinburn Spit.
They're covering our shipping layers. Positioned high up there along the river, they can effectively strike targets with a combination of their air attack assets and their artillery. They target Ochakiv, hitting the local population, infrastructure, and so on. So that
the Russians have no chance to shell mainland southern Ukraine with impunity. The 122nd's aerial reconnaissance teams are working non-stop in the sky.
Today, it's already been over 50 days for us. No rest, because there's simply no one to replace us. 86th Combat Sortie. Honestly, we're happy to work this sector, and you could say we've really gotten attached to it.
From Mykolaiv, Alexander Moturny, Alexander Shiyan, and Serhii Sportilo for the United News Marathon. Dines, on one hand, this is definitely the hottest sector of the Southern Front, Mykolaiv region. On the other hand, the lack of any visual cover on this physical line of contact makes being there honestly uncomfortable. There are still a lot of people left in the cities there, Ochakiv, all those coastal settlements. In your opinion, does it have any real operational or strategic significance for the Russians to maintain a presence on the Kinburn Spit and the entire peninsula there?
The report highlights this question: to cover shipping routes, terrorize the cities, and maybe someday get a chance to break out onto the main lane there. Although, again, as this report shows, they don't really have such chances.
So, since we're already discussing this topic, there's the theoretically possible crossing operation from our side with the clear intention of launching a flanking strike in the Kherson region against the Russians, or from the occupier side, moving in the direction of mainland Ukraine. Is this all just silly, empty theory, or under certain circumstances, with the available offensive and defensive means, could such an operation actually be possible?
If we manage to thin out their combat formations, but here you can see they're camouflaged, although now, as I understand it, they're acting more quietly than before.
The OTU commander said they're staying put because they've been ordered to stay low. What?
Yeah, because we're bombing them, constantly conducting reconnaissance, always finding, detecting, and destroying them. In theory, anything's possible. But in practice, I'm not going to fantasize. In my opinion, for now, the situation there is such that we have them under control.
And
there just aren't enough of them there to do anything, to land somewhere or to force anything. Likewise, for now, we don't have the troops there for that either. We're merely managing and controlling their ongoing presence, so they can't shell us or continue to terrorize the entire population.
that's all for now from the duty officer in the Spec Corps studio. Today we had military analyst Denise Popovich. Denise, thanks for the insights.
Thank you.
For now, we'll leave it at that, but we'll definitely continue. Take care of yourselves. We absolutely must persevere.